Turn up the dive, feel the vibe, get ready to ignite. Untold stories in the airways, flying through the night. Experience voices, tales so bold. Streaming live, the truth unfolds. Untold Radio Network, where secrets come alive. New episodes daily, the mysteries thrive. Great guests, super chat, it's so I remember right. Share and subscribe, join the side where truth can't hide. Aliens in the attic, UFOs in the sky. Cryptids lurking, oh my, oh my. Ghosts in the hallway, whispering your name. The paranormal, the unexplained. Become a VIP, get the inside scoop. Unlock the mysteries, be part of the group. Live streaming stories, they're talking to you. Super chats buzzing, join the crew. Untold Radio Network, the secrets come alive. New episodes daily, the mysteries thrive. Great guests, super chat, it's a wild member ride. Share and subscribe, join the side where truth can hide. So if you've got the guts and you want to explore, tune into the Untold, it's what you're looking for. From aliens to ghosts and all that's unseen. Untold Radio Network, where the world's mysteries convene.
The paranormal, UFOs, monsters, mysteries. You're listening to Talking Weird. And now, from a cabin deep in the Northwoods, your host, Dr. Dean Bertram.
Well, greetings, all my fellow weirdos and weirdettes, and welcome to Talking Weird on the Untold Radio Network. I'm your host, Dean Bertram, and as always, I am delighted that you are able to join me, whether it's live tonight across YouTube or X or Twitter or any of the places that the video goes out, or maybe you're watching the archive video afterwards or listening to the show on your favorite podcast platform. Greetings and thank you for being here with us. I have a great guest tonight. I met him when I was at Paracon in October, where I screened The Shaver Mystery, a short film most of you have probably heard me talk about Richard Shaver and about Ray Palmer. And it's kind of part of a bigger feature documentary that I've been producing now for a couple of years, which is gradually getting there. Anyway, he's a filmmaker as well, and I was super impressed with him. I was super impressed with his presentation. And along with being a filmmaker, he's a paranormal historian based out of Waukesha, Wisconsin. And from a young age, he started to experience things he couldn't quite explain. And that's led him on a lifelong journey to further experience and explain the supernatural. He has investigated haunted locations all across the Midwest, which is where I'm based as well, and as far abroad as Ireland. So I'm sure I'm going to chat to him about Ireland today, because most of the regular viewers of the show know I have a strong interest in fairy faith and other Irish legends. But he's also made a name for himself as the paranormal expert of Waukesha. So I'm delighted to welcome to Talking Weird, Josh Hughes. Greetings, Josh.
That was quite the intro. I don't know how to follow up after that.
Well, it was really nice meeting you at Paranormal. Sorry, not Paranormal. I was going to say Paracon, but at Milwaukee Paracon, because I didn't really expect there to be other filmmakers there. And there were a couple. There were you, and there was Ian, who I'm going to have on the show in a couple of weeks as well. So it was nice to see that there were other people in this state working in this kind of, weird space, I suppose. And we're going to jump into the title of the episode in a minute because I really want to talk to you about stone tape
Mhm.
theory. But maybe you could tell me how you put those things together: your love of the paranormal and your interest and abilities as a filmmaker.
Yeah, it's a very interesting journey because, like you mentioned in my introduction, I've been experiencing these things since I was a young child, and as I got into like college, I started picking what I wanted to do for a career, and that was when all the big name TV shows came out. Paranormal State, Ghost Hunters, a little bit before Ghost Adventures, but I'd kind of met a like-minded group of individuals, and we put together a paranormal investigation group at UW Oshkosh, and started to explore these locations, and that kind of blended with the film career that I was starting at Oshkosh. So it was really kind of like the perfect storm of everything coming together at the right time.
What kind of challenge? This is something I often ask people who make paranormal films or films in this kind of space. What are the type of unique challenges do you think there are in filmmaking? This is more a question for me maybe than for anybody else, but what are the challenges of working in the paranormal space and being a filmmaker, like producing content about these type of things?
I would say light. Light is a big issue because
Right.
normally when you're investigating ghosts, you're in a dark basement in the middle of the night, and the three key things about filmmaking is story, sound, and good lighting. If you don't have those three elements, it's not going to look good. It's not going to sound good. It's not going to feel good. So that's one of the bigger things. But there's been so many advancements in the past 10 years with low light video equipment that it's made it possible for people to capture good paranormal evidence when they're doing investigations. But for me, it's always story. Like story is always key, no matter what. I always tell people when it comes to ghost stories or films, you could film it on a iPhone one or film it on a potato, and as long as the story is good, then that's what matters most. So, there's a few things that go into it, but again, as long as the story is good, then I'm satisfied.
In your presentation at Milwaukee Paracon, which we might loop back and talk about a little bit
Mhm.
later, but I was super impressed with some interview footage you played with an old woman who had these just traumatic experiences, and the
Mhm.
emotion, and it was related to the paranormal, but the emotions you were able to capture her going through really drums home what you were just saying then, that story is everything. Like if this wasn't something which had resonated at that emotional level, like I don't think it would have been anywhere near as powerful, those interviews that you showed.
Right, right. And she was a 96-year-old woman who had been through immense tragedy in her life, and she found God. So she kind of saw the light and the right path in her life. And I don't want to say I tricked her in that interview, but I was there on like a dual purpose thing because I had been following the story that she was involved with for so long. But I was also very interested in the historical aspects of her property. So I was asking her many questions to get her down certain paths. And then as I actually turned off my camera, she says, "Do you want to hear about the ghost stories involved with my property?" And I kind of played dumb for a second, like, what ghost stories? I didn't know about this, even though I probably knew more about the history and the ghost stories than she did. But I quickly flicked the camera back on, pressed record, and I got such an emotional interview that I had to include it with my presentation because it was something that, honestly, nobody else has ever gotten out of her before because she's a very interesting woman with very intense opinions about things. So I'll kind of leave it at that. But I'm very lucky to have had that, especially with a woman who's nearing 100 years old.
I think we're gonna come back to it because I wanna talk about curses and the paranormal, and that was a cursed
Yes.
property. But we have a question from Horace Smith, who's actually Professor Emeritus of Astronomy and Physics at Michigan State University, and he's been a guest of the
Mm.
show, and he's a good friend of the show, and he asks, an interesting little question. We were talking about light. He says, "Do ghosts not like light, or are they just not recordable in bright, visible light?"
That's an interesting one. Um, so I had mentioned light as one of the difficult things when you're creating films about paranormal. And I specifically meant that because, as we know, camera settings, ISO, f-stops, all that sort of thing. As you go into dark locations, you need more light to properly capture good footage. And when you're in a dark basement at 2 a.m., there's no good light sources unless you bring outside light sources. So I don't think it's necessarily that they don't like light or they're not as easily captured during daytime. Um, I think the bigger issues along with that is that you need light to be able to see things. And when it's dark in a basement, you can't see those things. So that's the greater challenge. As far as when it comes to light, I think that you can capture a ghost photo or a ghost video at 1 a.m. On a Saturday night, just as much as you can at 11 a.m. on a Tuesday. These things, many more factors go into capturing ghosts and in the paranormal than we might expect or believe. So it doesn't always have to happen at night. It can very much happen during the day. And I've had many experiences during the day versus at night. So it's all very random, but there are also many theories as to why these things happen the times that they do.
Speaking about theories around hauntings, it's one of the things I was most looking forward to talking to you about tonight. It's certainly what I build the show as, and that is stone tape theory. So there might be some listeners, because this channel is a very cryptid orientated channel, and my
Hmm.
wheelhouse, I guess, is ufology. So maybe not everybody who's tuning in tonight even knows what stone tape theory is. So before we even start to talk about your interest in it, maybe you could lay out what stone tape theory is for the audience.
Yeah, that's a good one. And I'm probably not going to do it justice. My good friend KJ gave a very, very um, good presentation at Milwaukee Paracon about stone tape theory. And it was
Mhm.
very animated, very passionate, and she's a very good speaker. So it's tough to like follow up to that. But, most of the audience probably didn't see her at Milwaukee Paracon. But, um, I got involved with stone tape theory way back in probably 2020. I started doing Waukesha ghost walks around that time because my dad had sent me a photo of a little ghost girl that he saw in Cutler Park here in Waukesha.
Wow.
And now my dad cannot turn on a computer. He does not know how to surf the internet. So this is a man who isn't going to be able to manipulate photographs. Many people say he could have faked that, used an app, Photoshop. Not possible with this person. So when he sent me this photo of this ghost, a little girl dressed in Victorian era clothing, um, I had to dig deeper. And as I was talking to Mike Huberty, who owns American Ghost Walks, he says, "I have no idea about that story, but do you want to start doing the tour in Waukesha because we've been absent of a tour guide for a few years?"
Oh,
And one of the explanations that we came up with for this little ghost girl was stone tape theory. And very close to Cutler Park is a very, very large library built exclusively out of limestone. Now, stone tape theory is a speculation that when we pass away, energy is released from our bodies. And nearby stones, specifically, but other natural elements like wood, rocks, that sort of thing, absorb this energy and then they essentially replay all of that under certain conditions. And what that is exactly is, further to be explored. But essentially, these rocks are replaying our emotions as if it's a tape recording. So that's kind of the more simpler explanation of stone tape theory. But how I got further involved with it was I visited Ireland with my wife in 2022. And we went to the Hellfire Club, which is just outside of Dublin, about, I don't know, probably 20 or 30 minutes up a very steep hill. We climbed it on a Monday afternoon. So we were probably three, four, five people there. Very, very, very empty. And if you're not familiar with the Hellfire Club, I really suggest you go search it because this building is quite grotesque. It used to be something probably in the 1700s, maybe 1800s, but now it's basically this disgusting looking building made of rocks and There's no windows, there's no doors. It's all muddy in the basement. It's, succumbed to the elements over the years. And as I'm starting to explore this building, I'm starting to feel energies all around it. And it didn't really quite make sense because this wasn't, in our minds, an actual building. It's void of everything that we would basically call a house, a home, an office. There was nothing there. And as I was getting uncomfortable and attempting to leave this structure, I felt something almost like holding me back, keeping me in this building. And I didn't really know how to explain that because, again, it was 11 a.m. on a Monday afternoon with nobody there. So I should not have been feeling this. And I carried these feelings with me through the rest of Ireland, which is really quite the country to explore. And as I got back, I came back to this theory of stone tape and why I was experiencing these feelings at this structure could only be explained by stone tape theory because this Hellfire Club really has quite the interesting history where I think back in the late 1700s, the gentlemen that were there believed that one night perhaps the devil himself visited this building. So, with that amount of history and potential evil worshiping going on there, it certainly would give a little bit of further evidence to the stone tape theory. And ever since then, 2022, I've been chasing this documentary about exploring castles, haunted abbeys, graveyards, other derelict structures throughout Ireland to further explore, document, and understand the stone tape theory.
Oh, wow. I mean, I'm envious that you've been to the original Hellfire Club, which actually I can remember reading a biography of somebody like Francis Bacon or somebody back in the day that
Hmm.
talked about their exploits at the Hellfire Club. Have you seen the Nigel Neal penned 1972 film, The Stone Tape?
Yes, I know. So, this my journey into the stone tape has been uh, quite long. Again, I put together a feature film documentary pitch regarding the stone tape theory. I put together a TV series pitch regarding this, and I actually traveled to Ireland back in 2023 to pitch this concept at a international film festival.
Wow.
And as part of this documentary pitch I was doing, I researched the film that you just mentioned, the Stone Tape, which it wasn't as scientific and purposeful as what we've tried to do in later years. But looking at it, it was a good retrospect into what people initially believed this stone tape theory was. And I actually used a few clips from that because that was a BBC production, I believe.
Mhm.
And most of the people I was pitching to at this film festival were either from the BBC, Ireland TV productions. There was actually a few Australian TV producers there as well. So this
Oh,
was
wow.
the Celtic nations, but then I remember specifically there was one gentleman from Australia, at least originally. So yeah, that was a huge culture shock for me because everybody spoke like three or four languages, and here I was, the lonely American, trying to understand a little bit of Irish. But God, what a trip that was! It was really really fun.
Oh, I can only imagine. I'll throw a question, to you, and then we're gonna talk more about Stone Tape, and that is from Flat Rockland, who's a regular, um, viewer,
Yes,
listener of the show. Thanks for being here, Flat. He says, "Is some stone more conducive to this theory, like AKA limestone?"
that's a really good question. I just saw that pop up, and I instantly started nodding because so where the I mentioned Cutler Park was the initial interest in stone tape theory. There was probably a good 4 dozen homes and buildings, all in that area, built exclusively of limestone. All the foundations are limestone, and most of the exterior walls, at least, are either brick or limestone. So they do say that limestone is the most um, attractive of this stone tape theory. And what's really interesting is that most of that limestone was quarried probably half a mile to a mile from my home. So I'm very close to Carroll University, which was originally Carroll College, which is Wisconsin's oldest college, built in 1846. Most of those buildings are limestone, and where the football field is today is where the limestone quarry used to be. So all the limestone was dug up, and all the homes in probably a 2 mile radius were built with limestone. So it's really an interesting magnetic area for paranormal history, which is just, you could go into a 3 hour deep dive into that. But yes, the short answer is limestone is almost exclusively tied to the stone tape theory.
Huh. And there's a follow-up from Flat as well saying, do you find a flowing source of water combined with said stone can enhance the phenomenon?
That's a good question. I don't know if is his first name Flat? Is that his real first name?
I think that's just his, yeah, we can call him Flat Rockland. That's
We'll call him
his
Flat.
YouTube
So,
name.
what's weird about Waukesha is that in the 1860s, it was known as the Spring City. So there was probably 2 dozen springs that popped up near the Fox River, and they were said to have these magical healing powers. There was a colonel from the Civil War that came out here from New York with a life-threatening case of diabetes, started drinking from a spring nearby, and within 6 weeks, his diabetes was completely cured. So people were coming to Waukesha from all across the country, literally to drink water.
Wow.
And that Fox River, these springs are probably a mile from this limestone quarry. So you've got limestone, you've got stone tape theory, but you also have, going off a far deep dive into water tape theory. So lots of interesting things going on in Waukesha in a very close proximity with stone, with water, and a lot of haunted buildings in that proximity.
I tell you what, you've generated a lot of questions in the chat tonight, and I don't throw to the chat normally this often in questions, but I think they're
Okay.
all pretty solid questions. Nancy Malcolm, who's another wonderful regular on the show. Hey, Nancy, asks, whoops, no, hang on. It's an early one from Nancy. Here it is. Has there been any stone tapes involving crystal?
Hmm. Now that one I can't exactly give a specific answer to. We all know that crystal does have paranormal properties, whether that be positive or negative. But most of what I've done my research in with stone tape is rocks that were quarried to specifically build houses, buildings, businesses, colleges, that sort of thing. And there hasn't, we don't use crystal to make buildings. It's much more concentrated, whereas you're using quite a few limestone bricks to make foundations, to make walls, that sort of thing. So that's why we have a much more large population of these limestone rocks, where maybe it can hold in a lot more energy than a smaller crystal can.
And Horace has another question, which I'll comment on quickly before I throw it to you, Josh, and that is, what is the receiver of stone tape signals? I write as someone apparently not sensitive to things ghostly. Interestingly, I just have, because I'm such a fan of Nigel Neal and his works in the stone tape, which is where we get the term from, stone tape theory,
Hmm.
even though it's kind of been applied to residual hauntings, I guess, since then. But the idea that these things can sit within the rock somehow and be recorded as we might record voice on a normal tape or video on, today it would have been a tape, 20 years ago. Now it would be on
Right.
an
Right.
SD card. But the idea that these things can hold memories from the past and keep replaying them. In the stone tape, they make the point that some of the people there literally, they can't hear the voice, they can't see the figure, and some people who were subjected to the stone tape in Nigel Neal's wonderful, and it's literally one of the greatest pieces of television ever made. Like, it was a
Right.
1.5 hour TV movie launched on the BBC Two, as you mentioned, on
Yep.
Christmas Day in 1972, because the BBC used to have this tradition of doing ghost stories at Christmas, and this was one of the ones, part of a long tradition of making these type of productions. We've all forgotten that Christmas used to have a lot of ghost stories attached to it, but of course England and the BBC certainly hadn't in the 1970s. Anyway, I digress, but the point is that Nigel Neal imagined that there would be some people who literally, as Horace just said, didn't have that ability to hear or see anything at all. And other people could see
Right.
the ghost, other people could hear it faintly, other people could just hear it. So do you think this might apply? Maybe, as Horace says, is it a question of who's a receiver and who's not? How do you find that generally in your investigations, Josh? Like, are some people more susceptible to these things, or?
I like to relate it a lot to going through puberty. You know, some of us in our spiritual journey, our psychic abilities, we go through these things much sooner in life. And typically, I guess I don't want to say typically, but like in some circumstances, we go through these changes with our psychic abilities much sooner because of awful circumstances, a very traumatic event that kind of alters our perception and sends us into these abilities much sooner than others. Some people don't go through them at all through their entire life. I did see my friend Jay have a question that popped up, and he is a psychic medium that I've used many times on my investigations, who has picked up on things before I even tell him what's going on. Yeah, Jay and I have been to Carroll University a few times, which again built all of Limestone. But as I've talked to him about these sensations, these feelings, these things that I'm picking up on as a 35-year-old man, he says you're just starting to go through your essentially puberty transformation of your psychic abilities. Pay attention to these things more. When you see numbers that seem to maybe not be random, when you have these sensations, when you have these feelings, when you see something out of the corner of your eye, you have to start paying attention to these things. I like to believe that there are no coincidences in life. Nothing is random. As you go into a place that you feel something that doesn't seem natural, pay attention to that. And if you're always attempting to look out for these things, it's also not going to be effective. So I probably just contradict myself a little bit, but you know, there are some people that will never experience these things, even though they desperately want to see a ghost or be touched or hear a voice. And I can't, fully explain why that is, but the more and more I've done these things and I've started to pay attention and kind of grow in why I care about these things, it seems that I've been able to experience them a bit more. As a young 20-year-old, I was all about the thrill. I wanted to be like Pete Venkman in Ghostbusters and be a super cool scientist. And I kind of got that reality check, and now I care about the history. I care about interacting with somebody that's been dead for 100 years, because, as I always like to say, it's essentially the closest thing to time travel that we'll ever experience in our life, because I can sit there and talk to somebody who's been dead for 75 years, and that's just remarkable. What we can learn about them and the afterlife and science. It's just it is very exciting still, but certainly my perspective on things has changed a bit over the years.
That's interesting, you talking about communicating with these things. Do you think, and I love the time travel analogy, by the way, but do you think when you are talking to these things that it's something like stone tape that we've talked about, that it's just a memory or something embedded within place? Or do you think sometimes it's that and sometimes there's actually a consciousness which is continued after death and is consciously interacting with you? Or is it both? I mean, what are your experiences out there, Josh?
Yeah, I mean, I've had both. So essentially, stone tape is basically like a tape recording or a VHS, a DVD, whatever it may be. It's something that has a duration, right? Let's just say an hour and a half movie, right? That movie is going to be the same thing that you watch every single time. So that's essentially what the spirit or the interaction is. It doesn't know you're there. It's not, you know, intelligent. It's not going to interact with you. It's just repeating this time loop essentially of whether that be something they did in life, which was repetition, or perhaps they were murdered or committed suicide, something very extreme, and that's what they're repeating. We've got this screaming ghost in a castle, maybe falling to her death. That's stone tape because she's repeating that very traumatic event. But I've also had the other aspect of being able to use devices and communicating with something that knows who I am, knows that I'm there, knows the history of the property, knows its name, it knows everything. It's there to communicate with you and either give you information or let you know that it's here or get further answers. So um, even in my own house here, in this very room, there was a woman that passed away in the 1940s. And I've had many interactions with her over the years, whether that
Wow.
be the repetition thing, which maybe was something she did during life, but I've also had her communicate and visually show herself to make her presence known. So it's not always the same thing, and not every location is either stone tape or communicative smart spirits. In my interactions, specifically in this house, it's been both.
So in your house, you actually saw the entity?
A couple times. I've been here 7 years, and I've only seen her probably 3 or 4 times.
Could you tell us a little bit about those experiences?
That's a deep dive right there, but everyone's familiar with the HGTV show House Hunters, correct? It's where they look at three houses and they pick one. So my
Right.
wife and I were actually on that TV show, and
Wow.
I'm quoted on that show saying, "I want to live in a haunted house. The scarier it looks, I want to buy it. And I would pay more for a haunted house." And we bought this cute bungalow built in 1918. And upon moving in, I'm like, shucks, it's cute, it's fun. There's nothing wrong with it, right? But after about 3 or 4 years of living here, I started to pick up on little things here and there. And I didn't know if it was just my imagination or what, but as I started to do research on the house, I stumbled upon an obituary one night, and it says, sure enough, in 1946, the original owners built the place in 1918, and the wife's mother passed away in this house. She was in her 90s, so very, very old woman, right? And as I was doing more research, that fall, so it was about November, December time, things started just happening every single day. Christmas lights were turning on. We were hearing voices, seeing things out of the corner of our eye. And eventually, I got the courage one day to call the second owner of the house, who did a bunch of renovations. And as I'm asking him all these questions, I kind of have this pause, and I say, "Hey, what room did the grandma die in?" And he kind of laughs and he says, I wasn't supposed to tell you about that, but it was this room. And his son was having a lot of the same experiences that I was. He would frequently see this old woman tucking him into bed at night. And like
Gosh.
knowing that information essentially lit a bomb. And this house just had so much activity over the next year. Um, and I will say that we do have a daughter that's about to turn 1, and as she was a newborn, a few things happened, but not as much as I expected. And as we're getting into November, December, the holiday time of year, that's when activity seems to pick up. So maybe she's just excited, that is the ghost, that it's the holidays, family, happy memories. We'll see what happens this year, especially with a 1-year-old in the house.
I wonder if that 1-year-old will come to you, or it'll be like the child in Poltergeist, "They're back." Or
It was funny. When she's probably about 2 months, I was sitting here doing some work, and she was sleeping in my arms. And she woke up out of a deep sleep and looked to the corner of my office and started smiling. And I was like, that's probably nothing, right? It's nothing to worry about. But um, there's been a few things, but it's been all very positive. I like to say she's our little uh, old woman Casper type of ghost. Doesn't mean any harm. She's here to look after us.
Well, that's reassuring.
Right.
Speaking of things that scare us and things that might be friendly with the paranormal, we had a question a while ago from Brian Dukowski, which I was holding there on ice, and he says, "How can we explore more about the paranormal without triggering the fear that always seems to partner the haunted?"
That's something I still struggle with to this day. Um, is that my old coworker, Brian? God, that last name looked familiar. I used to work with him. Okay. Um, yeah,
Wow.
so it's something I still struggle with to this day. It's a huge surge of emotions when you're experiencing something that physically should not be there. But I find that when I'm behind the camera, when I either have my cell phone or like a cinema camera or a night vision camera, when I have like that cloak, something I can hide behind, it almost removes me from the situation in a good way. I'm able to focus on, I need to capture this ghost or this encounter or this experience. But when if I'm just sitting here with the lights turned off, or in a basement of a 200-year-old building without that kind of safety blanket, it's still terrifying. It's not always as fun or exciting as the TV shows make it seem to be, because you're interacting with something that's dead or non-human. um, it's not always exciting. I still get very scared from time to time, but I'm just a big baby. So it's not the same situation for everybody. But when I'm with friends, when I'm with like-minded individuals, when we're enjoying the situation, uh, it's not always scary. But when you're alone or with one person in a new place, it's just always a little bit of, hairs on the back of your neck raising up. It's just, again, it's not as exciting as all the shows make it out to be. That's just for entertainment purposes.
Oh, I'm sure. And it's interesting that you talk about when you look through the viewfinder or, in through the lens that the fear subsides. I think that is something native to filmmaking, even outside of the paranormal. Like I've
Right.
heard think war photographers say similar things. My girlfriend teases me about when I'm filming. I'm not actually filming genuine paranormal things, but like you're like
Right.
wandering to traffic and things. You just don't care. I think there is something weird about getting that shot where everything else turns off, and maybe that's an artistic process which transcends the general fear. But when it comes to
Right.
fear, when it comes to the unease with the supernatural, the paranormal, I myself, and again, this isn't my wheelhouse. UFOs are kind of my wheelhouse, right? But I can't help but wonder if some of that isn't because we don't pick up on the fact that some of these things might not be good for us. They might be inimical. They might not be benevolent at all. So do you think, and this is without saying it's demons or it's something else, I often wonder if a lot of the weird phenomena that we experience, and as regular listeners of this show know, isn't sometimes masquerading as something else. So maybe your great dead aunt in the family estate who manifests, maybe that isn't really her. Maybe that's something else. Just like maybe the UFO entity isn't a UFO entity. Maybe the
Right.
Bigfoot isn't a Bigfoot. But to stay in your wheelhouse, to stay within the paranormal and the haunted, do you think that some of these things present themselves as something they're not? Like a child ghost might be something else and pretending to be a child, or a dead relative mightn't be something else pretending to be a dead relative. Do you think there's some deception there?
I do. And that's why I always say never use a Ouija board. Um, because it's essentially like you're picking up the phone and you think you're talking to grandma, but you're not hearing her voice. So whatever is on the other line essentially could tell you it's your grandma, your aunt, your mother. Um, Never use a Ouija board because that's where deception plays a huge part. And those things can negatively impact your life. I've used it a couple times in life, and I completely got rid of mine because I just have not had good experiences. Um, and I do think there are other situations where, um, yes, things can deceive you. Um, but I also think, kind of leaning into that a little bit more is that, like, you don't always know what you're encountering. Um, like, I've had certain situations in this house where I think I know what's here, and then I'm presented with completely different information or encounters where, wow, that's nothing that I've experienced before. Where did this come from? So, as much as we think that we know about the paranormal, why and when things happen, it's all just theories and speculation. There is no exact answer to it. So it's very difficult, and people try to make sense of it all the time. At the end of the day, we really have no clue. So and that's why there's so many people that are interested, because it's like, what if you possibly could fully explain why and when hauntings happen? um, you'd be a millionaire, but that's never going to happen because it's the other side. So,
Maybe we're not
yeah,
meant. I always think we're not meant to know. I'm I'm fascinated with this stuff, but I'm always a pessimist when it comes to actually the idea of us solving any of it, anything of the broader Forteana, whether it's Bigfoot or whether it's UFOs or whether it's ghosts or whatever. I just don't think we're meant to know, and maybe we're not meant to know. Maybe it's something, it's a part of that, whatever the reality of the phenomenon is or not. Maybe it's something which is a part of our need in modern culture to have the, or throughout all of history. Maybe we need to
Right.
have the unexplained knocking our doors. By the way, it was Brian Dukowski said it is your friend, and he
Yeah,
wants
I see
to
that.
bring.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. I'm glad you. Sorry, he
So
wants
it's
to bring
not,
his
yeah,
partner
it's
to
not
manage your
always
tours.
scary. Some of it is very scary, but I've had some very, very positive, impactful experiences with spirits and the paranormal, where it's left a very good impression on me. So it is very scary, but it also is very exciting and very interesting at the same time. So the ghost walks are not fearful. They're very fun, good history. So if you want to learn more about Waukesha, that's where it's at. So Brian, if you want to convince your partner to come on the pub crawl this winter, reach out on LinkedIn. I'll give you 2 free tickets. Here we go.
Oh
Now
wow.
you have to come.
It's a good offer for Brian. We have another question from Horace Smith, again, the Emeritus Professor of Astronomy and Physics at Michigan State University, and he always is full of interesting questions. He says, sorry for so many questions. Do stone tape recordings eventually fade over time? And interestingly, that's something Nigel Neal deals with, that original screenplay as well. Is there
Right.
a mathematical relation of stone tape recording strength versus elapsed time? But I'll throw that to you, Josh.
Well, it's interesting because VHS tapes, those don't last forever, right? And eventually, as you watch it over and over again, it will fade out and become nothing. And that goes for a lot of things, paper, floppy disks, DVDs. Eventually, those things fade off. And I was asked this question on a ghost walk earlier in the summer of, do hauntings ever stop? Like, do they eventually like run out? And that was the first time I've ever been asked that, and it really kind of left me stumped because I never really thought about it like that before. So I think there is one theory that speculates that hauntings do kind of have an expiration date. Eventually, the spirits are done, or the stone tape does have again an expiration date where um, the energy is done being replayed. But in the United States, we can't really test that too much because we do have ghosts from the Victorian era, from the 1700s, from the 1600s. We're still experiencing spirits that have been around for what is that, close to 300 years now. So I think that stone tape theory specifically has to be tested in other parts of the world. And the reason I picked Ireland is because, well, I do love Guinness, but it's a small country that's able to be traversed very easily. You can get from Dublin to Galway in 3 hours, which is essentially east to west. And we've got castles, we've got graveyards, we've got abbeys from around the time of Jesus, right? So we have these places that are still haunted from that far back. So that's why stone tape theory I felt was perfect for Ireland, because we have so many very, very old locations where we're still experiencing that. So if I had to answer right now, does the stone tape have like that expiration date? I would say no. I would just say that the stronger the energy, the longer it can last. Basically like a battery. So I do believe that eventually that battery runs out, but some batteries are much stronger than others.
Yeah, that it's certainly interesting, and all of these ideas and explanations for what's behind hauntings fascinate me. Speaking of Ireland, though, it's a place I've never been to. I very much want to go there. I'm envious that you've been there. What do you think about some of the other Irish legends, just quickly, like fairy faith, for example? And often that intersects with the belief in the existence of life after death and the dead. Is that something you're interested in as well, or?
It is, and there's a lot of interesting energy and stories surrounding like fairy forts and fairies themselves. There used to be, Irish beliefs that if you trip over the stairs or you lose your keys or something like that, that this is fairies that are causing this little mischief to happen in your life. So, um, while we think in America that fairies and fairy forts and banshees or vampires aren't real, in that part of the world, those were very, very real things at one point in history. Bram Stoker's Dracula was based on a real person in Ireland that drank blood. So for them, these aren't stories that are made up. These are real things that people have witnessed and encountered over the years, and they still very much believe in them. So you go through these little Irish towns, you have little Irish forts for the fairies. Desiccating a fairy fort is essentially a crime punishable by law. Um, you know, these are not myths or folklore. These are very, very real things to people in those countries. So a great deal of respect has to go towards them.
Yeah, I'm very sympathetic to fairy faith. Like I take it quite seriously. Like I'm not a debunker, but I'm skeptical. I'm not skeptical that there's anomalous or paranormal phenomenon. I really think that there is all kinds of weird phenomena, but
Right.
I'm often skeptical of our interpretation of it, or what that it might be different to what we perceive it as culturally. But
Right.
the ongoing history of, I mean, Ireland's a great example of fairy faith, but the idea of the other this other race or this other species existing aside us throughout all kinds of cultures all over the world, there seems to me to be something that's so resonant about that that I take it quite seriously. And it sounds
Well, I
like, I
mean,
mean, that I
or,
almost sound silly when I say that, but I do. I take the fairies more seriously, or the fair folk, or the other crowd, or the she. I take them more seriously than almost any other of the
well, because
various
it kind of
phenomena
dips
that I
into the
talk about.
shaver mystery a little bit, doesn't it? It's kind of like this other world of people that are living amongst us. I can certainly see the correlation between the documentary you've done with the shaver mystery and fairies. It's um, when you have separate cultures that have these beliefs about these like secret societies, like you have to start paying attention to it, right?
Oh, I think so. And that was nice of you to bring up my documentary as well. We do have a question from JD Hill speaking about documentaries, and he asks you, do you plan on making more documentaries on this topic? And I think he means generally the supernatural or the paranormal or ghost type apparitions.
Yeah. So I kind of sent this to you when we were talking about the show. I visited this haunted church in Jericho, Wisconsin, earlier in the summer, and it's an old school, a convent, and a church from late 1800s, right? Very, very old, very, very small town, and you just kind of like pop out through cornfields, and boom, here it is. And it's got a haunted past, and uh, the people who are currently fixing it up, she gave me a tour, explained what they're experiencing, and it did not make sense. I kind of she could have seen above my head, there was question marks all over the place, but what she was saying was that there's like a paranormal ley lines that intersect with this specific property that involve like Native American history, different faith history, where they're able to communicate not just with spirits who have a connection to this spot, but they're able to communicate with their dead grandpa, their dead mother. People who have never been to Jericho, Wisconsin, maybe who have died hundreds of miles away. It's
Wow.
almost like there's a lightning bolt, thrown down by Zeus himself that struck this place and said, "This is essentially where the paranormal can plug in and communicate with you, no matter where they're from." And the more and more they start to explain this to me, I'm like, "Holy, I'm gonna save the language. Holy God!" It's like, wow, this place is really, really special. So I'm actually speaking with a few people on potentially developing this into a documentary because I'm all about trying to explore not just like haunted locations, but why is this unique location haunted, or why are we experiencing these certain things in a certain spot? So Um, that one certainly has been on my radar ever since September because it just doesn't make sense, and I want to explain why it makes sense.
Wow. And I know you let's talk about some of the other cases you're looking at. You sent me a link to a graveside as well, and you said that you were looking into some of regarding that case. Could you talk a little bit about that as well? Because you're looking into so many fascinating things. I mean, it's also interesting.
And it's all just kind of, after the Paracon, it all just kind of like blew up in a very positive way. But so there's a very infamous story here in Waukesha, and I'll kind of really glaze over this quickly. But in 1921, there was a little boy, about 8 years old, that was found dead in the quarry. And they believe that he was murdered and then thrown in the quarry. Now, after a week, nobody claimed this little boy. And so he was buried in a cemetery very close to where I'm right now. And to this day, they still have no idea who this little boy is. And all it says on his gravestone is unknown boy found in quarry and the date that they found him. Now, there's been a few leads on this cold case over the years, but nothing substantial where they can say, yep, that's probably him. So the other day, since this question comes up on my tour quite frequently, they say, why hasn't anybody dug the boy up and used modern DNA testing to find out who he is? I don't have an answer. So I eventually, again, this is maybe a week and a half ago, I emailed the medical examiner and I explained, I do the tour, I get this question, and I just want an answer. Why haven't you dug him up? And they gave me a very good response. They said, we've dug up a number of bodies in the cemetery. And again, I'm using simple language here. They've exhumed bodies and they've used DNA testing to find out who they are. And the medical examiner said, it seems that in the near future, we will be exhuming the body of this unknown boy to find out who he is.
Gosh.
And so, he's been in there since 1921. And Dean, as a filmmaker, you can certainly understand the excitement that ran through my body when
Yes.
I heard this news that we're going to be exhuming this body to figure out who he is. I instantly texted Jeff and I said, hey, we have to do something with this, right? So, I mean, that's very, very fresh, that news. And I just emailed back and said, we need to make a documentary about this. Who do I have to talk to? So, still waiting on that phone call to figure out what the next steps are. But, um, I've been trying to figure out who this little boy is, for the past 5 or 6 years. And people are so curious to know who he is. So it's, um, perhaps in the near future, we will be able to find out and be able to tell a very good story cinematically in that process.
It sounds like it. I would love to see that film. I'd love to have it at Midwest Weird Fest, the festival I run in Eau
Right.
Claire one day. Are you going to go? It's funny, just as an aside, I'm been working on the Shaver Mister or the bigger feature, The Man Who Invented Flying Saucers for a couple of years now. And my girlfriend's always giving me a hard time. When are we going to go somewhere? It's not going to be about the film. Love you, baby. I'm half joking. She's always joking with me as well. I went, well, she was like, let's go to Ireland. That would be a fun trip to do. And I'm like, then I can finally make my fairy documentary if we go to
Right.
Ireland. So my point is I'm always like thinking of the next film as a you. But are you going to go to Ireland and make this stone tape documentary? Because that's something I'd love to see. I mean, I'd love to see everything you talked about, but given my love of Ireland, I would love to see that so much.
It's been a long process. I had a very, very good pitch deck put together. I got funding. Things fell through. As you know, in filmmaking, things often fall through. That's why I went to Ireland to pitch it at the film festival. I didn't go running home, with $100,000 check like I hope I would. And I've been, I had the feature, I had the TV show, I had this concept of stone tape in Ireland developed into two routes. But, the biggest hurdle is money. I've just been telling people over the past couple months, like, give me $15,000 to just go make it. I'll do it essentially for free. Just pay for travel and expenses. Um, but that one's just kind of in my back pocket, because it does take a bit more money to go over there and do it. Whereas Jericho, the little boy in Waukesha Cemetery, are local. It's easier. It doesn't take as much money. But my passion, my eventual hope is that do get some funding, are able to go make uh, a good story, a cinematically good story over in Ireland about the stone tape theory.
That would be so fantastic. Maybe you should Kickstarter it or Indiegogo or GoFundMe or something.
I hate begging people for money though. And I hate spamming people on my social media for money. But I think I have so much developed into this concept that I might just have to do a Kickstarter or a crowdfunding, because it's like, man, I just have to make it. I
I mean,
just
it's a
have to.
legitimate thing. I'll kick
Right.
in when you do it. Like I'll buy a T-shirt or make a donation or whatever the devil it is. It's a documentary that to me sounds like it
Hmm.
needs to be made. In the meantime, though, tell us about some of the other things you're doing. I know that Waukesha Ghost to Walks has probably stopped until after the winter, but you've got, like you mentioned before, you have a type of you have a pub crawl or something like that coming up.
Yeah.
Is
So
that
every
right?
year, this is the end of my fourth year of doing the Waukesha Ghost Walks, and I was like, we got to develop the tour a little more. I want to do something different. So this winter, we're trying to do. We're probably going to do a haunted pub crawl. So we have two bars signed on already. One of them is Club 400. Shout out to them, Waukesha, which has a very good connection to Les Paul. I have had many, many haunted encounters there. If you're an Instagram user, Waukesha Ghosts, I think on Instagram is where I have some of the good evidence of what I've encountered at Club 400. It has a very, very good history, good haunted history, good drinks, good food. So they're one of the bars involved. We have two more bars involved, and we're looking at doing that in late December. A 3-hour tour with all the haunted stories in Waukesha, but also you get to stop at some bars, use some ghost hunting equipment, and have a drink or two. So it really combines a lot of good parts of Waukesha's history.
It sounds fantastic. I wish I could get down there for it. Maybe I'll be able to. It's funny. I have a weird little Waukesha story when when I first visited Wisconsin. Now it must be like, I don't know, over a decade ago.
Hmm.
I have a very good friend here, Wayne Klingman, who's in Racine, and he's been on the show a number of times. And you might have even met him at Milwaukee Paracon, actually.
Okay.
I'd gone back to Australia and he didn't even know. And I was home alone in Australia on Christmas Day. And I made a joke referencing the famous Happy Days episode where Fonz is left alone eating baked beans and he's told everybody he's going to his aunt's house in Waukesha. And he isn't really, he's just home alone and he doesn't want to seem
Right.
like, he's needy. And I just did a Facebook post saying, looks like I missed the last bus to Waukesha because Fonz had to keep getting the bus to his aunt in Waukesha. And my very good friend Wayne Klingman, thinking I was still in Wisconsin, sent me this lovely message saying, I'll come and pick you up. Like, were you at the bus stop? Where are you? I'm
Oh,
like,
really? Oh,
yeah, no,
God.
it's a reference to my favorite Happy Days episode. So that's my only connection with Waukesha, but it's still an excellent connection. How do people? Firstly, it was wonderful having you here, Josh. But how do people get a hold of what you're up to? How do they follow you? I'm going to have some of the links you sent me in the show notes so people can check there as well. But maybe you might want to tell them where you'd like them to look.
Yeah, I always seem to forget it, but yeah. So Instagram is where I'm the most active. It's at Waukesha Ghosts. That's where I post a lot about the tours, the stories, the visual evidence of what I've experienced from these stories. LinkedIn, I'm very active on. Facebook, I'm a little bit more private and selective, just because you get too many friends, it just blows up. But Instagram is probably the go-to place to reach out to me if you have a haunted story, if you want to come on a tour, if you have more questions. I'm always happy to answer things, just because it's just fun to educate people about the paranormal, about Bigfoot, aliens a little bit. We have our own little very interesting alien story here in Waukesha, but Instagram, the
Oh no,
go-to
stop. Let's
place.
stop right there. You got to tell me the alien story. We're not going to close now until you tell me that story.
Apparently, since 2001, Waukesha is the second most UFO sightings per population in the country, which
Get
obviously
out.
number one is Roswell, but Waukesha has a very concentrated area of UFO sightings, which is probably about a mile from me, all in one spot. So maybe I'll have to come back and we'll talk more a little bit more about the Waukesha stories. But yeah, one
Indeed.
UFO story that I'm just like, it doesn't make sense, but it's reported. So people are talking about it.
Well, that's fantastic. I'm going to have you back on to talk UFOs now. Again, like I said, that's my main, I suppose, focus. But
Right.
it was such a delight having you, Josh. Thank you so much for joining me tonight.
I appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And until I get to talk to you again, Josh, and until I get to talk to everybody else out there, please keep it weird.